This is the story of a birthday I'll never forget. Not because of who came, but because of who didn't. They promised they'd be here, every single one of them. I even ironed the napkins. But the message that landed on my phone wasn't an apology. It was a brightly colored emoji, followed by 8 polite excuses that shattered my heart. Just last night, a group text, brimming with those cheerfully vacant emojis, confirmed it. So sorry, Grandma. We're all swamped this year, but love you lots. 8 names. 8 perfect, polished reasons not to come. I stared at the glowing screen, the words searing into my vision, then quietly, almost reverently, folded the apron I just tied on. The next morning, driven by a stubborn sort of defiance, I set the table anyway. White linen just like James, my late husband, always liked for holidays. Plates I hadn't touched in years, the good china. The gleaming cutlery. 8 chairs meticulously polished sat waiting. Quiet. I counted them again, not because I doubted the number, but because each seat held a phantom presence, a cherished memory. Each one belonged to someone I'd once held in my arms. Danny, my oldest, used to insist on the window seat, swearing he could see the birds while he ate. Emma, the youngest, always needed that ridiculous cushion under her to reach the table. How she hated that cushion. I still kept it in the cupboard. For what? I still don't know. Maybe for today. The rich aroma of roast filled the air, already in the oven. Not because I harbored some foolish hope they'd change their minds. I'm not naive. But a birthday, my 80th, is still a birthday, and 80 years on this earth has to count for something, right? The phone rang around noon. I didn't pick it up. I knew the voice it would carry, strained, laced with guilt, maybe even a hint of annoyance. Oh, Grandma, we didn't think you'd go to all the trouble. As if trouble was a foreign concept to me. As if raising 3 kids alone hadn't trained me in its every nuance. I poured the gravy into the delicate porcelain boat, placing it carefully at the center of the table. No one likes lumpy gravy. I learned that early. And habits, even the unappreciated ones, are incredibly hard to break. I sat at the head of the table, my place always, and I looked at the empty seats one by one. Not with anger. Not even with profound sadness, not anymore. Just stillness. Because somewhere between Danny's first scraped knee and Emma's college graduation, I had quietly, almost imperceptibly, become optional. No malice, just distance. Outside, the wind began to pick up. I watched the trees sway, not violently, but with that deep, resigned bend that says, I'm used to this. I took a sip of water, lifted my fork. 8 chairs. 1 old woman. A roast that smelled exactly like home. I was only 17 when I cooked my first full dinner alone. My mother had burned her hand, and my father was far too proud to eat from a can. I boiled potatoes, roasted a chicken, and yes, overcooked the carrots. He didn't say thank you. Just muttered, could use more salt. I suppose that was the first time I truly understood what effort looked like when it was utterly invisible. After James passed, this house felt too wide. Not large, we never had that kind of money, but wide in the way absence makes a room echo. Still I kept on. Taught school, raised the children, and learned how to fix things I'd never wanted to learn. Toilets, gutters, taxes. Life taught me what it means to manage. And through it all I cooked. I cooked when I was tired, when I was grieving, when the power went out and I used candles and guesswork. Food was how I anchored the day. How I told my children they were safe. Even if I wasn't always sure myself. So when that message came, the one from yesterday, it didn't truly surprise me. Not really. What genuinely surprised me was how little it stung. The real ache had arrived years ago. Not in one sharp, sudden moment, but in a slow, accumulating quiet. Fewer visits. Shorter calls. The way birthdays turned into gift cards and messages that always began with, sorry, can't make it. I remembered when Lucy, my daughter, used to leave me voice notes. Her bright laugh would fill my kitchen. Now there's just silence. Not angry silence, no. Worse. The kind that thinks it's nothing personal. Yesterday my neighbor Nancy, bless her heart, brought over a lemon cake. In case your family forgets, she'd said, half joking, half pitying. I thanked her, set the cake aside, and later wrapped it in foil. I don't eat sweets. James had a sweet tooth, not me. But I kept it for reasons I didn't explain. Nancy and I used to talk more. We were both teachers, both widows, but now she walks slower, talks less. Like me, she understands what it means to become the background of other people's lives. You knew they wouldn't come, didn't you? She'd asked this morning, watching me through her screen door. I nodded. Not because I was certain, Nancy, but because hope has manners. It waits until the evidence is absolute. Then it steps back politely and lets truth sit down. Still I set the table. Because if I didn't, the silence would win. At 2 o'clock I lit the candles. Not because anyone would see them, but because I wanted to. Because I was still here. Because birthdays, like dignity, are not things you wait to be granted. You claim them. The meat, I admit, turned out a bit dry. That's what happens when you spend too long staring at empty chairs instead of the oven. I cut the slices neatly, as if my guests were merely running a little late. The good china, white with little blue vines, sat untouched. It felt theatrical, yes, but also utterly necessary. The clock ticked. The air grew still. And then a soft, uncertain knock. My heart leaped. I opened the door and there she was, Molly. My daughter Carol's second child. The one who never replies to texts, but always hugs longer than the rest. She looked nervous, twisting her hands. I didn't know if I should come, she whispered, her eyes darting. The group text. I didn't mean it. I didn't even see it until this morning. I let her in, not because I entirely believed her, but because I desperately wanted to. The familiar, comforting smell of roast chicken and over-buttered potatoes filled the room. Molly's gaze fell on the table, on the 8 set chairs, and I saw something flicker in her face. Shame perhaps, or a dawning recognition. I thought maybe you'd be mad, she offered, almost apologetically. I'm not mad, I said. And I wasn't. That was the strange part. I had been mad years ago. But not now. Now I was something else. Tired, maybe? Or simply done asking. We sat together, just the two of us. She took the seat James used to take. I didn't comment. We talked. Not about the others, not about their absence, but about books, her new job, my garden. Normal things. Real things. Felt good. Solid. When she left, a slice of Nancy's lemon cake wrapped in a napkin, she kissed my cheek. You always make it feel like home here, she said. I stood at the door long after she'd gone, looking at the street. Quiet again. But not the same kind of quiet. Something had shifted. The roast sat mostly untouched, the candles burned low. But for a little while there had been warmth. Not the kind you schedule, but the kind that arrives anyway, like light through a window you forgot to close. And for now that was enough. By the way, if this story is resonating with you, and you're still with me, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. I have so many more stories, some unbelievable, some heartwarming, all very real, coming your way. I couldn't sleep that night. Not because of anger that I'd learned to put down like a heavy coat, but because each chair at the table had started speaking. Not out loud, of course, but memory has its own voice, and it never whispers. The one by the window, that was Danny's, my oldest grandson. Tall, clumsy, always knocking something over. When he was 12, he built me a birdhouse, misshapen, painted too bright, but I hung it anyway. He used to say, "I'll fix your roof someday, Grandma." I still have the same roof, the same leak near the back porch. Danny never came back with a hammer. Across from him, the second chair belonged to Clara. She once cried because I packed the wrong snack in her school bag. "You don't know me at all," she'd sobbed, 10 years old and full of drama. I laughed then gently. Now I wondered if she was more right than she knew. Maybe I never did know who they were becoming. Or maybe they didn't want me to. The seat nearest the stove, Henry's. My middle daughter's boy, quiet, thoughtful, allergic to just about everything. I used to bake him special bread without eggs, milk, or joy. He hugged me once and said, "I love you more than school." That was the highest praise at the time. He doesn't right now. Doesn't call. Last I heard, he moved to Oregon to reset. I wasn't part of the reset. Each chair carried a story. Not one of them had asked to be remembered. But that's the thing about memory. It never asks permission. It just arrives uninvited and stays as long as it pleases. The room was cold in the morning. I wrapped myself in the old green cardigan James used to tease me about. Said it made me look like a librarian lost in a forest. I wore it anyway. Warmth mattered more than style. I stood by the table, looking at the now stale rolls, the gravy boat with a skin forming over the top, still set as if the others might come belatedly. But they wouldn't. Even Molly, as kind as her visit was, had said, "I didn't know if I should, not. I knew I needed to." That difference lingered. I cleared the plates one by one, slowly, carefully, as if the porcelain might bruise. It wasn't grief I felt. It was something quieter. Something like resignation but with a backbone. In the afternoon I walked to the edge of town, not far, just to the strip mall where the bank sat, next to a bakery and an empty florist shop. I nodded to familiar faces, most of whom didn't notice me. That's the thing about age. You become part of the scenery. Unless you make noise, no one checks if you're still breathing. Inside the bank, it smelled of printer ink and faint anxiety. I asked for Margaret, the manager, who always offered me tea I never accepted. She smiled when she saw me, but it faltered when I said I wanted to talk about adjustments. "Are you sure, Mrs. Bennett?" she asked, her voice tinged with caution. "We can look at alternatives." "I've made up my mind," I said, my voice steady. She nodded and fetched the forms. My hands didn't tremble as I signed them. That surprised me. I canceled every monthly transfer I'd set up for the grandkids. College funds, rent help, car payments. It wasn't revenge. It was math. 4 years I'd subtracted from myself, hoping they'd notice the balance. They never did. When I left the bank, the wind had picked up. I clutched my cardigan tighter, but I didn't feel cold. Not really. Just ready. Back home, I opened the side drawer in the kitchen. Inside were envelopes, each labeled with a name. Danny, Clara, Henry, Emma. I used to tuck money into them around holidays, birthdays, just in case, I always said. I gathered them all, emptied them into a single blank envelope, and wrote Molly on the front. She hadn't asked. That mattered more than anything. The doorbell rang just before dusk. It was Nancy again with 2 mugs and a bottle of cider. "You look like someone who made a decision," she said, setting the cups down without waiting to be invited. "I suppose I did." "Good." She poured the cider. "About time." We sat by the window as the last light faded. No television. No music. Just the kind of silence that makes space, not noise. "I used to think being needed was the same as being loved," I said, surprising even myself. Nancy nodded. "That's a common mistake. They teach us that early. But it's not true." "No, it's not." She looked at me, warm but firm. "You're still allowed to matter, even if no one's clapping." We clinked mugs and I smiled. Not because anything had changed, but because for the first time in a long time I had. The next morning I opened the curtains wide. Let the light in. Let the dust show. Let it all be what it was. I walked past the dining table, still set with half-cleared memories, and into the little hallway closet, the one with the accordion door that always stuck halfway. Inside, behind the winter coats, in a box labeled "Miscellaneous Lights May Be Working," sat an old blue binder, thick, heavy, nearly bursting at the seams. I laid it on the kitchen table and opened it. Each page was a receipt, a copy of a check, a handwritten note in the corner, my own looping script. Danny, June for mechanic school deposit. Clara, emergency vet bill for the cat, the one that hated me. Emma, rent while job hunting again. Henry, April, utilities, didn't ask but lights were off. I turned the pages slowly, like reading a book I no longer liked but couldn't stop rereading. And maybe that's what it was. A story where the plot kept promising warmth but delivered something else. Politeness, distance, dependence without intimacy. By the time I reached the back of the binder, my tea had gone cold. I didn't bother warming it. Some things lose flavor when you try to revive them. I didn't feel sorry for myself. That's what people always assume. That we sit here old and alone, full of regret. But that's not it. Not really. What I felt was something much simpler. A reckoning. For decades I gave because I could, because I believed it meant something. And perhaps it did for a time. But there comes a point when giving turns into erasure. You blur so much into other people's needs that you forget your own outline. I stood, walked to the trash bin and dropped the binder in. Not out of bitterness but because I no longer needed proof. Later that day I received a message from Clara. A photo. Her holding a glass of wine at a rooftop bar. Caption. Cheers to surviving the week. No mention of the birthday she skipped. No question of how I was. Just a shiny life at a distance. I didn't reply. Instead I made soup. Simple, thick, the way James liked it. I chopped slowly, carefully. There was no rush. No one to impress, no one to disappoint. While it simmered, I pulled out another folder. This one labeled house. Deeds, insurance, tax receipts. At the bottom, a legal envelope I hadn't touched in years. My will. Written when I was 65, revised once at 72, untouched since. I read it through. It was fair. Equal portions. Names in order of birth. Logical. Dull. Then I took a pen and wrote a note across the top, to be revised. I underlined it twice. 5. There was a knock. I opened the door to find Molly again. This time holding a grocery bag and looking sheepish. I thought you might be out of eggs, she said. And I wanted to talk. I let her in. She put the bag down and stood awkwardly, unsure whether to sit or wait to be scolded. You don't need to explain, I said softly. I want to. She sat, twisting her hands. When the message went out, I didn't write it. Clara did. She said, let's just make it easier for Grandma. One message instead of 8 awkward ones. And I didn't speak up. I stirred the soup. And then you came anyway. Because I couldn't stop thinking about the way you used to cut my sandwiches into triangles. The time you let me sleep in your bed when I was afraid of the dark. How you always made space for me, even when you didn't have any to spare. Her voice cracked. I didn't want to become someone who forgets that. I ladled soup into bowls. We sat and ate. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was something else. The kind of quiet that listens. When she left, I gave her the envelope. The one with her name on it. She didn't look inside, just held it close. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. Some things don't need to be said to be understood. Later, I sat by the window and watched the street go dark. Porch lights flicked on one by one. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Ordinary sounds. A normal night. But inside me something had shifted. Not in a grand way. Not with fireworks. Just a small, precise click, like a door finally locking behind you. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone waiting. I felt like someone choosing. The text came at midnight. A photo again. This time from Danny. A group of them all together. Danny, Clara, Henry, Emma, crowded around a restaurant table, smiling, holding cocktails, someone mid-laugh. The caption read, Cousin Night. First time in ages. I stared at the screen for a long while, then turned it face down. So that was it. They hadn't just skipped my birthday. They'd made plans of their own. Not separately. Together. As if they were their own family now, with their own orbit. And I was some faint planet long out of range. And I wondered, as I sat there in the quiet kitchen, Whether they'd spoken of me at all that night. Whether one of them had said, "We should have gone to Grandma's." Or even, "Did you see the table she set?" Or maybe they didn't mention me at all. Maybe it was easier not to. The next morning I pulled the curtains shut. Not in bitterness, just for rest. The light was too honest. I went to the garden. James and I had planted it together the summer before he passed. I'd let it go wild in recent years, but the roses still fought their way up, stubborn and tangled. He'd always said they were like me. Beautiful, but not without thorns. I knelt beside the hydrangeas and pulled a few weeds, my joints crackling in protest. In the distance I heard children. Not mine. Not theirs. Just someone's laughing, their voices bright like glass in the sun. When I came back inside, there was a voicemail from the bank. Polite. Procedural. "Mrs. Bennett, your requested changes are now reflected in your accounts. All automatic disbursements have been canceled as instructed." Just like that. The quiet severing of years of habit. I made tea and sat by the radio, tuning it until I found some soft music. Instrumental. No lyrics to distract. Just sound. Just breath. A knock came around noon. It was the mailman, a new one, young, distracted, earbuds in. He handed me a few envelopes, bills mostly, and one glossy postcard from Clara. A picture of a beach, some distant coastline, all blue and white and golden sand. On the back, scribbled in hurried script, "Thought of you. The water is your color. Hope you're well." No return address. I placed it on the counter. It slid slightly off balance, like it wasn't sure it belonged. That evening I took out the photo albums. Not out of longing. Out of curiosity. I wanted to see if the warmth I remembered was real, or just a story I'd been telling myself all these years. Page by page I saw it. Birthday parties, scraped knees, silly faces, finger paint disasters. Me with flour on my nose. James with his lopsided grin. Kids piled into laps, arms around necks, eyes full of something that once looked like trust. I traced one photo with my finger. Danny at 12, proudly holding up a science fair trophy. "You're the reason I won," he'd said that day. "Because you made me practice explaining it until I could do it without stuttering." And I believed it meant something. Maybe it had. Then the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. On the fourth try I answered. "Grandma." Henry's voice. Awkward. Hesitant. "We just realized it was your birthday yesterday. Clara said you might be upset. We didn't mean to make you feel left out." I didn't respond right away. "Everyone's just been busy," he added a little too quickly. "But we were thinking maybe next weekend we could all come over, do a belated thing." I closed the album. "No, Henry," I said quietly. "You don't need to come." "But I set the table yesterday," I interrupted him. 8 seats. All empty. That's enough memory for me. He was silent. Then, "I didn't know it would hurt you." "I know," I said. "That's the problem." We spoke a little longer, polite, strained. Then I hung up. I sat in the living room, hands folded, listening to the creak of the house settling in for the night. This home had held so much. Laughter, grief, birthdays, bills, arguments, reconciliations. Now it held something else. A woman learning to stop waiting. Not in anger. Not even in sorrow. But in quiet, resolute clarity. Somewhere out there, for grown grandchildren were laughing at a restaurant table. That was their right, just as it was mine to decide not to keep a seat warm for them anymore. That night I slept deeply. For the first time in years I didn't dream of voices calling for me down a hallway I couldn't reach, only silence. And it was enough. I didn't tell Molly what I'd done. Not yet. She'd find out soon enough, if not from me, then from the silence that would greet the others when they reached for the usual lifelines. And they would. I knew that much. I'd kept track. Not out of resentment, but out of the same habit that makes you check if the stove is off twice before bed. Emma's rent reminder came the 12th of each month. Henry's recurring just until next week draw came every Friday. Clara's gym membership. Danny's insurance copay. A dozen invisible strings stretching from my bank account to their lives. Now cut. That morning I made oatmeal. Not because I liked it, but because it was easy and filling and warm. I sat at the kitchen table, watching steam rise from the bowl, and let the stillness settle around me. The phone rang once. I didn't answer. Twice. Still I waited. By the third time, I recognized Clara's name on the screen. Picked up. "Grandma," she said, not cheerful, not even neutral. Just tight. "Hey, did something happen with your bank account? My card got declined at the pharmacy." I stirred the oatmeal slowly. "Yes. I made some changes." There was a pause. "Oh, okay. You could have told us." "I suppose I could have," I said. Another pause. Longer. I could almost hear her scrolling through the reasons in her head, trying to land on one that would let her sound hurt without sounding guilty. "We're not mad," she said finally. "Just surprised." "I'm not mad either," I said. "Just done." That was all I gave her. That and a silence she didn't know how to fill. She hung up a few seconds later, after a few weak suggestions about talking it over sometime. I washed the bowl, wiped down the counter, folded the dish towel. Routine had always been my armor, and now it was holding firm. By mid-afternoon, the messages were coming in faster. Emma. "Hey, I think something's wrong with the rent transfer. Can you check?" Danny. "My insurance bounced. Did the bank screw up?" Henry didn't write. But I saw he'd viewed my status photo. The one Molly took last week of us sipping cider in the backyard. By 5 there were voicemails, half concerned, half suspicious. Only one message made me pause, from Emma again. "Grandma, I know we've been distant, but please don't shut us out completely. That's not fair." I replayed it once. Then again. Not fair. As if fairness was a currency I'd hoarded and just now started spending. I walked into the guest room, the one James used as his study, the one that now held dusty books and a sewing machine I hadn't touched in years. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the drawer of his desk. Inside, his old watch stopped at 2:41. I'd never replaced the battery. Next to it, a notepad, his handwriting on the top page. "Roof guy, Wednesday, 10 a.m. Ask about flashing." Beneath that, a blank page. I pulled it out, smoothed the paper flat, and began to write. Not a letter. Not a list. Just thoughts scattered, real. They forgot me on my birthday. Together. Not out of cruelty but convenience. I was too easy to set aside. I fed them, paid for them, forgave them. They gave me occasional thanks and casual neglect. I am not a bitter woman. I am a tired one. I folded the note and placed it inside the envelope I'd once labeled Clara. I crossed out the name, wrote keep instead. No address. No explanation. That night, I lit a candle in the dining room. Not for mourning. For ritual. For the simple act of saying, I am still here. I poured myself a glass of wine. Not a celebration, not quite, but a marking of time. And I sat alone at a table that once held so many voices. 8 chairs. 1 woman. 1 steady flame. Not grief. Not anger. Just peace. Hard one. Quiet. And wholly mine. The next day began like most do. With the creak of the floorboard near the bathroom and the soft resistance of cold air through the window I always forget to close properly. But something was different. Not the light. Not the weather. Me. I sat with my morning tea and stared at the phone, which hadn't rung once since last night. No new messages. No missed calls. The silence was different now. Not absence but distance. A kind of retreat, like the wind pulling back before a storm. I knew what came next. Guilt. Not the kind that says, we're sorry, but the kind that masks itself as concern. And sure enough, around noon it came. An email from Danny. Subject line. Let's talk. Nobody. No greeting. Just that. I deleted it. Not to be cruel. Just to be clear. I spent the afternoon in the attic. Not for any practical reason. It was hot, cramped, and smelled of old wood and forgotten fabric. But because I needed to remember something for myself. There were boxes up there labeled in James' handwriting. Winter coats, old tax files, Mom's books, and one with no label at all. I pulled it open. Inside were letters, real ones from when the kids were young and I was still Mom, not Grandma. Cards with crayon drawings. Notes from summer camp. A folded piece of paper from Danny at 9. I miss you. Henry's being mean. I laughed quiet, a little sad. I couldn't remember the last time Danny wrote anything to me that didn't include a Venmo request. At the bottom of the box was a photograph. Me and James in front of the first house we bought. He had his arm around me. I was holding a paint roller, my hair pulled back, and we both looked alive. Not just young but lit from within. Determined. I sat there cross-legged on the attic floor and let myself cry. Not for the kids. Not even for the birthday. For the time. For all the versions of myself I'd given away without thinking. The woman who stayed up sewing costumes, who made lasagna from scratch for high school fundraisers, who sat through parent-teacher meetings and dentist appointments and late-night phone calls about breakups and failed exams. I don't regret her, but I needed to find her again. That evening I wrote a letter. A real one. Pen and paper. It began simply, to whom it may concern, including myself. I wrote for an hour, not to explain myself but to affirm myself. I wrote about choices. About endurance. About what it means to be overlooked until you stop looking back. About the strange freedom that comes from no longer being needed in the way you used to be. When I finished, I folded it and put it in the same envelope I'd written keep on. Slid it into the side drawer next to James's watch. Not for them. For me. Later, as I swept the porch, Molly came by. She didn't knock, just appeared like she often did, her coat half-zipped, her face a little flushed from the wind. I saw Emma at the market, she said, sitting on the step. She's upset. I didn't reply. She said, "You're cutting everyone off." "I am," I said. "Except you." Molly looked down at her hands. "I think they're starting to realize." "Maybe." I leaned on the broom. But realizing isn't the same as changing. We sat in silence for a while. The sun dipped lower. Lights began flickering on across the street. "You know," Molly said softly, "I think they forgot you were a person." I nodded. Sometimes I did, too. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in the others in a long time. Respect. Not gratitude. Not guilt. Respect. When she left, she hugged me hard. "I'll come by this weekend," she said. "You don't have to." "I know." I watched her walk down the street until she turned the corner. Then I went back inside, turned off the porch light, and locked the door. Not to shut the world out. Just to remind myself this space is mine. And now so is the silence. I ate alone that Sunday. Roast chicken, just a thigh and a few potatoes. Nothing fancy. Nothing performative. No plate set for ghosts. I didn't use the dining table. I sat at the small kitchen table, the one tucked near the window, where James used to drink his morning coffee and talk to the radio as if it were another guest. The quiet there didn't press. Just existed. There was a knock around for. I assumed Molly, but it wasn't. It was my neighbor Irene, 76, fiercely independent, though her knees had started betraying her. She held a pie dish in both hands. "I made too much," she said, though we both knew that wasn't true. I let her in, poured tea, and we sat in comfortable near silence while she carved the pie. "Apple," she said. "Not sweet. Just enough." We'd known each other for decades, but never deeply. We exchanged weather forecasts, trash pickup reminders, notes about raccoons in the compost. That was the extent of our friendship. Until today. I heard, she said, setting down her fork. I looked up. Heard what? She raised an eyebrow as if to say, don't insult me. I live next door. I see the cars that don't come. I saw you setting the table last week. 8 places. And then I saw you sitting alone. I said nothing. My tea was cold again. I hope they're ashamed, she added, not unkindly, just plainly. They're busy, I replied. The defense came out automatically, tired and thin. Irene snorted. So were we once. Still never skipped our mother's birthdays. We sat in that until it settled. Then she said, you know what I remember most about my own mother? She never let herself be pitted. I looked at her. She said, if they don't make room for you at the table, build your own. It was the kind of thing people say and forget. But it landed. Not because it was new, but because it was time. After she left, I stood at the window and looked at the sky. It was pinking at the edges. That soft early evening hush before the streetlights wake. I thought about all the tables I'd set over the years. The ones with birthday candles, even when the cake came from a box. The ones with casseroles after surgeries and divorces. The ones where we said grace even though no one really believed, but we all needed something to hold on to. And I thought, I don't need more chairs. I need something of my own. That night I opened a fresh notebook. A real one. Not a binder. Not a record. Just pages blank and wide. I titled it in the top corner. Next. Not plans. Not revenge. Just next. And I started writing. Things I wanted to do. Places I hadn't seen. Books I bought and never opened. A pottery class I once passed by and said, maybe later. It wasn't a bucket list. It was a reclaiming. The next morning, I walked down to the community center. The young woman at the front desk blinked in surprise when I asked about classes. Pottery, I said. And maybe that gardening group. I hear they're brutal about weeds. She smiled. They are. And we have one spot left for the pottery class. I filled out the form with a steady hand. Paid in cash. Later, I sat on a bench outside, watching a group of older women argue over tulip bulbs. Their voices carried. One of them waved a trowel like a conductor's baton. I didn't speak. I just watched. But I'd be back. That evening Molly called. I ran into Clara, she said. She looked like she'd been crying. She probably had. She asked if you were okay. I said you were fine. She didn't like that answer. I laughed quiet. People don't like when you stop needing them. No, Molly said. They don't. We didn't talk long, just enough. After we hung up, I sat in my favorite chair. The old armchair with the sun-bleached arms and the cushion that never sat quite right. I pulled the new notebook onto my lap and added another line. Start walking again. Not for exercise. Just for air. And beneath it, find a way to forgive without reopening the door. Because I wasn't angry. I wasn't mourning. I was simply turning the page. And for the first time in a long, long time, the pen was in my hand. I received a letter the next morning. Not a text. Not an email. A real letter, envelope, stamp, even my name written in actual ink. I stood by the mailbox holding it like something delicate, like something alive. It was from Emma. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, like she'd started it angry and finished it tired. Inside, 2 pages folded once. Grandma, it began. No, dear. Just that. And then, I didn't know what was happening. I thought we were all just busy. I didn't realize how much we were relying on you, how much we'd taken for granted. I guess I thought you'd always be there. I sat down on the front step and read the rest, with the morning sun on my lap and a breeze lifting the corner of the page. I don't know what to say, except I'm sorry. Not just for missing your birthday. For everything. The years I stopped calling. The way I always assumed you'd be okay. The way I thought giving you space meant giving you respect, when really it was just neglect. That line stopped me because it was close. Not quite the truth but circling it. The letter ended without a question. No, can we talk? No, can I come by? Just, I miss you. I hope it's not too late. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my cardigan pocket. Inside, the kitchen smelled of lemon oil and warm wood. I'd been cleaning lately, not frantically but deliberately making space. Not just clearing mess. I poured myself tea and sat by the window. Not waiting. Just watching. I thought about what it means to miss someone. How we use that word so easily. Miss you. Miss this. Like it's a coat we throw on for weather. But real missing is quiet. Heavy. It doesn't announce itself. It just lives in the space between things. I didn't reply to Emma's letter. Not yet. Not out of punishment. Out of precision. Because this time I wanted my words to match their weight. Later that day the phone rang. Molly again. Henry called me, she said, straight to the point. He's worried about your state of mind. He said he's thinking about calling a lawyer. I blinked. A lawyer? Molly sighed. He thinks maybe something's wrong. That maybe you're being manipulated. I laughed. Not a cruel laugh. A tired one. Because I stopped paying his bills. Exactly. I leaned back in the chair. Let him call. You're not upset? No. I'm curious. Because it was one thing to be invisible. Another to be inconvenient. It had been over a week since I made the changes, since I drew the line. And now slowly the pushback had begun. Not with fists. With worry. With concern. With language that sounded like love but came wrapped in control. I wrote a note that night, one line. Being needed is not the same as being wanted. I taped it to the inside of the cupboard door where the tea bags were, where I'd see it every morning. The next morning I called my lawyer. Just checking, I said. That everything's airtight. I don't want any surprises. He chuckled. Mrs. Bennet, your documents are so thorough they make me nervous. Good, I said. I like nervous men in expensive suits. We hung up on laughter. Real laughter, the kind that sticks. That afternoon I got a knock on the door. Clara. Not expected. Not ready. She stood there, smaller than I remembered. Maybe that's what guilt does. Shrinks you. Can I come in? I didn't answer, just stepped aside. She walked to the dining room, looked at the bare table and then at me. No chairs this time, she said. No guests either. She sat anyway. I don't know what to say, she began. You don't have to say anything, I replied softly. But I want to. So I let her. For 10 minutes she spoke about childhood, about distance. About how easy it had been to let the rhythm of her own life drown out mine. She cried once, quickly wiped her face. I didn't reach for her hand. And when she stood to go, she looked at me and said, You were always stronger than us. I see that now. I didn't say thank you. I just nodded. And when the door closed behind her, I felt it again. Not victory, but clarity. Because this wasn't about reclaiming control. It was about restoring the shape of who I'd always been. And from that place I would decide what and who to let in. The lawyer's office was quiet, neat. Smelled faintly of pine cleaner and paper. The kind of place where words have weight and documents outlive apologies. Francis greeted me like always, respectful, reserved, a trace of worry behind the professional calm. He offered tea, which I declined. I didn't come to be comforted. I came to be clear. I assume this isn't just a social call, he said. I handed him the envelope. That's the revised version. He slid it open, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. His eyes moved slowly, deliberate, then stopped. You've removed your grandchildren from the primary inheritance clause. Yes. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. All four. I nodded. And you've named a sole beneficiary for the trust account. Molly. Yes. Are you absolutely sure? That's the question they always ask. Not because they doubt my mind, but because they know what it costs to act alone. especially when you've spent your life giving, sharing, bending. I'm not angry, I said. I'm resolved. He nodded once, began processing the new paperwork. As I waited, I looked around his office. Same old books. Same wall clock ticking softly. On the windowsill, a new photo. His grandkids, it looked like. 2 boys, a girl, all gap-toothed grins in summer skin. They still come see you? I asked. He smiled. Every Sunday. Pancakes and Monopoly, it's our thing. I didn't envy him. I didn't even ache. I just registered the contrast. When everything was signed and stamped and filed, Francis looked at me. I don't say this lightly, Ruth, but what you've done, it's rare. Most people wait too long. They leave behind confusion, battles. You've left clarity. That was the point. He saw me to the door. You know, if this were fiction, your grandkids would show up any minute with flowers and remorse. If this were fiction, I said, they'd have come last week with cake. Back home the house felt smaller. But not in a bad way. In a manageable way. As if I'd finally shrunk it to fit just me. I made tea. This time I drank it hot. And I sat in James's old chair. The one with the frayed arm. He always liked the view from there, the street, the trees, the neighbor's dog that barked at the wind. I thought about all the things I'd put off, not big things, simple ones. Fixing the garden gate. Getting new curtains for the guest room. Donating the clothes I'd kept just in case. Painting the hallway. None of it dramatic, but all of it mine. The phone rang mid-afternoon. I let it ring. Later I checked the voicemail. It was Henry. Grandma, we got your letter. Or Emma did. We passed it around. I'm not going to pretend we weren't shocked, but I get it. At least I think I do. You were always there, and we thought you always would be. I guess we treated you like a fixture, not a person. He paused. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if we even can. But I want to try. If you'll let me. He didn't say sorry. But I heard something in his voice I hadn't heard in years. Uncertainty. The real kind. The kind that leaves room for change. I didn't call back. Not because I'd given up. Because I wasn't ready. That night Molly came by again. She brought a stack of photo albums from her mother's house. I thought maybe you'd want them back. We sat on the floor and flipped through them, laughing sometimes, wincing others. There was a photo of Clara at 13, wearing braces and a terrible perm. Me beside her in an apron frosting a cake. She hated that perm, Molly said. She told me it made her look like a poodle. I smiled. Another photo. Danny at 5, asleep on my shoulder, my eyes half closed, mouth open. Exhausted. He always said you were the only person he trusted to put him to bed, Molly said quietly. I closed the album. Love doesn't disappear. But sometimes it goes dormant. And sometimes it learns to grow in new places. We packed the albums away. Molly kissed my cheek before she left. At the door she turned. They're going to ask you for another chance. I know. Will you give it to them? I didn't answer right away. Maybe, I said at last. But on my terms this time. And not all at once. She nodded. Good. And then she was gone. And I was alone again. But not lonely. There's a difference. And I'd finally learned it. The next morning I woke early. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There's a difference. And at my age you feel it in your bones. When you rise for yourself, the floorboards don't groan quite so loud. I opened the windows, let in the breeze, the bird chatter, the sharp scent of summer grass. The house breathed with me. And then the doorbell rang. Not tentatively. Not nervously. 3 firm presses. I didn't rush. I'd stopped rushing for other people years ago. I just hadn't realized it until now. It was Nancy. She stood with a small basket covered in cloth, still warm. Scones, she said, brushing past me like she'd been invited. I laughed. You've been watching British dramas again. Better than watching The Neighbors, she shot back. though your porch has become quite the topic. I poured tea. She plated the scones. And we sat like old friends who didn't need to fill the air to enjoy it. They're talking, she said finally. Who? Your family. I raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. People hear things. I heard Henry went to see your lawyer. He did. Thought he could contest something. He can try. She looked at me then. Really looked. And if they came to your door tomorrow, would you open it? I considered, stirred my tea. Maybe. Depends who's knocking and what they're carrying. Apology or expectation? Nancy nodded. Well, if you need me to stand behind the curtain with a broom, just say the word. You'd enjoy that too much. Only a little. We ate in silence after that. Comfortable, even kind. I didn't ask her why she'd come. I knew. When a woman has lived long enough, she senses the tremors in another woman's life. And sometimes scones are the only way to say, I see you. After she left, I found myself drifting toward the living room, toward the mantelpiece. The photos there hadn't changed. Still framed. Still smiling. James holding Clara's hand as she tried to balance on a garden wall. Me and Danny, flour on our faces mid-laugh. Henry asleep in the crook of my elbow. His tiny hand tangled in my necklace. I didn't move them. Not out of denial. Out of memory. Because forgetting isn't healing, it's erasure. Later that day, I heard voices outside, familiar ones. I stayed inside. I wasn't hiding. I was watching. They stood on the sidewalk. All four. Danny, Clara, Henry, Emma. They weren't fighting. They weren't laughing either. They looked unsure, unrehearsed, as if this time they hadn't planned what to say. Eventually they left. They didn't knock. And I felt something between relief and regret. That evening, I opened the notebook I'd labeled Next. I added a line. Let them find their own door. I've stopped holding it open. And underneath, but I haven't locked it. I spent the evening writing letters, not to them. To myself. To the woman who once stayed silent to keep peace. To the mother who swallowed disappointment with a smile. To the grandmother who thought being generous meant being small. I wrote, you did what you knew. Now you know more. And you can love them without losing yourself again. The moon was high when I went to bed. The kind of clear silver moon that makes the sky look scrubbed clean. I pulled the covers up to my chin and whispered aloud, I'm still here. And I meant it. Not as defiance. As truth. I was still here. And for the first time in years that felt like enough. Molly came by with a newspaper folded under her arm. Found something, she said, handing it to me like a secret. We sat in the kitchen. Light pouring in through the lace curtains. She sipped from her usual mug. The one with the chipped rim I keep meaning to throw out but never do. I unfolded the paper and smoothed the page. It was an old article, reprinted from the local archive. Ruth Bennett, 40 years of quiet service. A photo, me in my 40s, younger but already tired, standing in front of the school with a clipboard and a chalk stain on my blouse. The article praised my unwavering dedication, my calm authority, my impactful but often overlooked role in shaping young minds. I hadn't seen it in decades. Molly pointed to one sentence. She never sought recognition, but she changed more lives than most who did. I blinked, looked away. You never mentioned this, she said. There didn't seem to be a reason. There is now. I folded the paper gently, placed it on the counter and sat back. It's strange, I said. That woman in the picture, she gave everything. And somehow no one ever asked if she had enough left for herself. She's still here, Molly said. Just a little gray. That made me laugh. We didn't talk much more. She stayed to help me rearrange the pantry. Not because it needed it, but because it gave our hands something to do while our hearts sat quietly nearby. When she left, I stood in the doorway and watched her go. Newspaper tucked under her arm again. A little wind lifted her hair. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. I went back inside and pulled a photo album from the shelf. Not one of the messy, overstuffed ones. This was the old black book. Leather square. Edges worn soft with time. The first photo was of James and me, just married, our eyes wide, hands held tight, as if we knew storms were coming and decided to walk into them anyway. I turned pages slowly. Each one held something real. Not just moments but effort. Birthdays I baked for. Costumes I sewed until my fingers ached. Camping trips I hated but smiled through. A life not easy but lived. Halfway through I found a photo Molly must have slipped in, a recent one. She and I sitting on the porch, mugs in hand, our faces turned toward each other in mid-laughter. Sunlight across my shoulder, her hand resting lightly on my wrist. I stared at it longer than the rest, because in it I didn't look like a grandmother waiting. I looked like a woman choosing, and that mattered. The phone rang that evening. I let it. Then a knock at the door. Not rushed. Not light. One clear knock. Then stillness. I opened it to find Emma. Alone. She held nothing. No flowers. No cake. No offerings. Just herself. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Then sit, I said. And don't say anything yet. We sat in the living room across from each other. No table between us. Just air. Just time. She looked older. Not in age but in her eyes. Something humbled. Something real. I read your letter, she said finally. Twice. I waited. And I know I haven't been present. Not really. But I want to be. If that's still something you'll allow. I didn't smile. Not yet. Wanting to be here, I said, isn't the same as showing up. You don't earn back trust with words. You build it with time. She nodded. I'm not asking for everything, she said. Just the chance to begin again. From wherever we are now. That finally made me smile. Small. Honest. Beginning is allowed, I said. But not on the old terms. I wouldn't ask for those, she said. They didn't serve either of us. We sat in the hush that followed. The house didn't feel strained. It felt held. And for the first time since my birthday, someone was in my home without expectation. Just presence. When she left, she didn't ask if she could come again. She didn't promise more. She just said, "Thank you for opening the door." And I said, "Thank you for not knocking like you owned it." Then I closed it gently, sat back in James's chair, and wrote in the notebook. They're beginning to learn the language of return. I don't need to translate it anymore. And under that, dignity isn't loud but it never forgets how to answer. The garden had begun to turn. It always does. Midsummer, too hot for the pansies, not quite time for the chrysanthemums, everything in between. Like me. I stood near the rose bush, shears in hand, deadheading the tired blooms. James used to say roses were like old women, tougher than they looked, hard to please, and determined to keep blooming long after everyone else had wilted. He wasn't wrong. I cut carefully, not to control the plant but to give it space. Molly showed up around noon, hands covered in paint, hair pinned haphazardly. She carried a box. "What's that?" I asked. "A surprise," she grinned. "But not the sweet kind. I know you hate frosting." We sat at the kitchen table. She opened the box and took out a stack of framed photographs, but not family ones. Not from my albums. These were mine, taken by me. The daffodils I'd once planted along the fence. A photo of the school library before it was torn down. James, captured from behind, arms crossed, watching rain through the kitchen window. "You took these," Molly said. "And they're good." "I was just playing with the old camera." "Maybe," she said. "But I think you were keeping record." "Not of them. Of you." I hadn't looked at those photos in years. I didn't even remember her borrowing them. But now they sat between us. My gaze. My timing. My eyes in every frame. "You should hang them," she said. not hide them. I'm not one for walls full of myself. But it's not about that, she said. It's about not vanishing. She left the box with me. No instructions. I didn't hang them right away. I just carried them to the living room and leaned them along the baseboard, studying them as if they belonged to someone else. And maybe they did. To a version of me I'd let go of. Or to the woman I was becoming. That afternoon I opened the notebook again. This time not to write. To reread. Every page carried the voice I'd forgotten I had. Not clever. Not bitter. Just honest. I spent a lifetime making others comfortable. I forgot comfort for myself was allowed. It is not selfish to stop giving what no one values. Peace isn't the absence of people. It's the presence of self. I closed the notebook and looked around the room. The chairs were empty, but they no longer felt accusing. They just were. Objects. Furniture. And me. No longer waiting to be chosen. The mail arrived late. Just one letter from Danny. No return address. Handwritten like Emma's. Grandma, it began. I don't know what I'm supposed to say that hasn't already been said. So maybe I'll say something new. I read it slowly. I miss you not just because things are different now. I miss you because I didn't realize I needed you until you weren't on the other end of the wire. There was a pause in the ink as if he'd stopped, then started again. I won't ask for anything. Just want you to know I see it now. All of it. The birthday table. The quiet grace. The kind of love that never once made a show of itself. At the end, one line stood alone. If you ever decide to leave a chair open again, I'll come early. And I'll bring the napkins. I held the letter to my chest, not sentimentally but steadily. Like something earned. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Because sometimes remorse arrives late. And sometimes that's enough. Not for repair. But for recognition. That night I made myself a dinner I actually wanted. Not roast. Not polite food. Just what I craved. Buttered noodles. Black pepper. A glass of red wine. I ate slowly with the radio playing something low and warm. I was alone, but for the first time in a long while I felt accompanied. Not by others. But by myself. And that, I wrote later, was the most faithful company of all. Sunday came bright and quiet. I used to dread Sundays. They held too much space. Too many memories of full tables, sticky fingers, high-pitched laughter echoing off the walls. Then over the years the noise thinned out. First into silence. Then into absence. But this Sunday was mine. I didn't dress for anyone. I wore my softest sweater. The one with the hole near the wrist I keep meaning to fix. I brushed my hair but didn't style it. I ate toast. One slice. Blackberry jam. No plate. 10 I walked. Not far. Just a loop around the block, past the school, the faded mailbox, the maple that always turned too early in the fall. I nodded to a neighbor, waved to a toddler chasing bubbles on the lawn. My breath felt steady, my spine upright. I wasn't hurrying. I wasn't waiting. I was moving because I could. Back home, I opened the front door and stood for a moment. Just stood. Let the air shift around me. Let the stillness catch up. There was an envelope on the doormat. No stamp. Hand-delivered. I knew the handwriting before I picked it up. Clara. Inside one sheet. A single sentence. I don't know how to undo it, but I know I want to. That was all. No excuses. No schedule. No invitation. I placed the note in the kitchen drawer next to the extra candles and the old recipe cards I don't use anymore but can't bring myself to toss. And then I went to the shelf, pulled down one of the frames Molly had brought, and hung it. It was the photo of James at the window, his back to me, the outline of his shoulders framed by soft morning light. I hung it not because it meant something to them, because it meant something to me. I had built a life not always loud, not always praised but present. Present in every packed lunch. Every birthday call unreturned but still dialed. Every quiet forgiveness I gave without needing it to be earned. I hadn't disappeared. I had simply been overlooked. But not by myself anymore. That afternoon I opened the notebook again. This time only one line. Let the world knock. Because I wasn't behind the door anymore. I was in the light. In the garden. In the frame. A few hours later, I received a message from Henry. Not a voicemail. A handwritten card slid under the back gate. It read, I started volunteering at the shelter. You always said giving without asking is what teaches a person who they are. I think I finally understand. And beneath it, I know you're not looking for promises. But I want to show up. If not for the past, then at least for the now. I held the card in my hands, thumbed its edge, and left it on the table without a reply. Because this wasn't about responding anymore. This was about witnessing. Noticing. Letting them learn that love isn't guaranteed. It's earned, grown, maintained like a garden that weeds itself when ignored. Evening settled in, soft and golden. I made tea. No one came. And still the house felt full of breath. Of memory. Of a woman who had given everything and finally learned to keep something for herself. On the morning of my 82nd birthday, I woke before the sun, not out of habit but out of ease. The air was still, the kind of stillness that feels earned, like the quiet after a storm, when the world hasn't started talking again. I moved slowly, carefully, brushed my hair, pulled on a soft blouse, buttoned it at my own pace. No one was coming, and yet I still chose to look like myself. In the kitchen, I boiled water for tea and lit a small candle. Not a celebration. A marking. A quiet, clear acknowledgement. I was still here. I walked past the dining room. 8 chairs still stood. But the table was bare. Not set. Not dressed. Just wood, polished, catching the light. It didn't need place settings to mean something anymore. I opened the front door and stepped out into the day. The sky was pale, the kind of soft blue that reminded me of old bedsheets and baby clothes. I closed my eyes and listened. To birds. To wind. To nothing demanding. There were no cars in the driveway. No messages on the phone. But I wasn't waiting. Instead, I walked to the garden. Molly had left a card tucked into the rose bush, her handwriting unmistakable, crooked from rushing. For the woman who reminded me what strength looks like. No signature. None needed. Later that afternoon, there was another knock. I opened it expecting no one. But there they were. All 4. Danny, Clara, Henry, Emma. No flowers. No cake. Just their hands. Empty. Unsure. I didn't say anything. Neither did they for a moment. Then Danny stepped forward. No speeches, he said. Just, would it be okay to sit? I nodded slowly, and they followed me inside like strangers entering something sacred. We didn't go to the dining table. We sat in the living room, knees nearly touching, like a family learning how to be one again without asking for permission. Clara was the first to speak. I was wrong, she said, her voice barely a whisper. We all were. I don't expect anything from you. Not forgiveness. Not money. Not time. But I needed you to see us this time. Really see us try. Emma nodded. And we needed to see you. Not just as the woman who gave. As the woman who is. I looked at them. Not children. Not my little ones. Adults now. Capable of leaving. Capable of staying. I'm not the center of your lives anymore, I said, my voice steady. But I am not a shadow either. If you want to come back, come with full hearts. Not empty hands. They nodded. No promises. No rush. Just presence. We sat together in the soft afternoon light and didn't feel the silence, because the silence no longer frightened me. I had walked through its rooms, swept its corners, and made it a home. That night, after they left, I stood at the window, the candle still flickering. I thought of all the women like me. Women who gave. Who stayed quiet. Who waited far too long to speak in their own name. And if you're one of them, sitting with an untouched table or a birthday forgotten, or a silence you didn't ask for, let me say this as someone who finally learned. You are allowed to set the table for yourself. You are allowed to reclaim your voice, even if it shakes. You are allowed to be seen not as what you gave but as who you are. Have you ever felt yourself shrinking to fit into other people's expectations? How did you find your way back to yourself? Tell me your story in the comments below. I truly want to hear it.